The valley was silent beneath the drone's steady hum, a strip of shadow between ridgelines where the earth looked bruised by years of war. Through the grainy monochrome feed, Command watched as heat signatures flickered like dying embers. Then one flare broke formation, slicing through the mountains with impossible velocity. The operator froze, the cursor trembling over the screen as the object banked 90 degrees without losing altitude. The system stuttered, telemetry spiked, and an infrared bloom erupted where there should have been cold air. For a moment, the valley itself seemed to bend. Voices on the encrypted channel overlapped, distorted, until one cut through. "That's not ordnance. That's movement, then static." A storm of data corruption cascaded across the feed as the drone's stabilizers compensated, but the object remained, darting, pulsing, alive. When the image froze, the last frame showed something metallic and wrong, trailing a ripple that warped the clouds. By dawn, the footage had been sealed under Level 6 clearance, rerouted through channels reserved for incidents that officially never happened. The analysts were dismissed, the data purged from visible archives, but whispers traveled faster than deletion protocols. A special recovery unit was formed within hours, a team handpicked from the 160th SOAR and DARPA's Anomaly Division. Orders came without explanation, stamped eyes only. The coordinates led to a crash site with no record of impact, where satellites failed to render topography and compasses bled magnetic north. They were told it was debris from an unidentified drone strike. They were told raw. Even before wheels lifted, the pilots felt the weight of something unseen. An electromagnetic hum that distorted their headsets and made their teeth ache. The flight into the valley was silent, except for the low mechanical groan of the rotors and the rising distortion on the radio band. Below, the ground looked warped, like sand under heat haze, though it was night and cold enough to frost steel. When the team touched down, the air felt heavier, as though pressure itself bent around an invisible core. The GPS lost lock. The airfield beacon vanished. Even the stars seemed misaligned. One operator said he heard a voice through the comms, something layered, almost harmonic, until the signal cut completely. Havers ordered perimeter formation. Ortiz's Geiger counter ticked erratically, then flatlined. The object wasn't visible, but the valley was no longer quiet. The silence pulsed. Ortiz found it first, buried halfway in the sand, smooth like glass but warm to the touch. The handheld magnetometer spiked, then went dead. The buried object pulsed faintly under the dirt, like a heartbeat. When they tried to photograph it, the cameras captured nothing but darkness. Even infrared refused to acknowledge its shape. Havers ordered a secure perimeter and called for drone relay, but the uplink failed. The radio hissed back a phrase in a voice not their own, repeating coordinates that didn't exist on any map. The longer they stayed, the louder the frequency grew, until they realized it wasn't coming from the air. It was emanating from beneath their boots. The earth convulsed once gently. Then light erupted in silence. No heat, no sound, only a brilliance that defied the logic of distance. It radiated from the buried object and rippled outward, swallowing shadow, reshaping geometry. Havers fell to his knees, his vision fracturing as if reality itself split into separate exposures. Ortiz screamed, not in pain but disorientation. Her voice echoed twice, a second behind itself. The radios burst to life with overlapping transmissions. Old voices, wrong time stamps, lost frequencies of dead soldiers. Then it stopped. The valley returned to stillness. In the center of their camp, the sand had fused into glass, and something was moving beneath it, slow, deliberate, aware. Within hours, the Pentagon issued a containment directive under codename Project Seraphim. The valley was quarantined by a detachment from the 160th SOAR and black-clad units without insignia. Satellite passes were redirected. Every trace of the incident was scrubbed. Every soldier involved reassigned or silenced under national security law. Only Major Haver's team remained on site, isolated, disoriented, and physically altered. The air around the object carried a subtle vibration, a pitch just beyond hearing. Command believed it was radiation. Havers knew better. The pulse wasn't decaying. It was sensing. The closer they moved toward the buried structure, the more it seemed to recognize them. Somewhere beneath the sand, it was listening. The first sign of contamination wasn't visual, it was auditory. Ortiz began to hear her own voice seconds after speaking. Recordings from body cams replayed conversations before they occurred. Every instrument inside the containment tent emitted a faint tone, synchronized at precise intervals, forming a pattern no analyst could decipher. Havers tried to rationalize it as feedback until his headset whispered back his own words in reverse. The signal wasn't just echoing, it was mirroring them. Command demanded continued study. Havers requested evacuation. The request was denied. The object's pulse grew louder. By the third day, seismic scanners revealed a hollow chamber beneath the fused glass plane. The readings suggested movement, but not mechanical, organic, resonant. Ortiz volunteered to descend with Kari. The shaft was narrow, lined with metallic residue that shimmered like mercury under torchlight. The deeper they went, the more their comms fractured into static whispers of their own voices repeating from impossible depths. Havers monitored from above, pulse racing as the signal warped into something melodic. When Ortiz's camera panned downward, it caught what looked like a structure breathing, its surface flexing as if aware of their presence. Then her feed cut out. No, you should shrey. In a mouse, men seeing the Kathy At 2,200 hours, the entire base went dark. Generators failed, instruments died, and the radios screamed at feedback pitch that made men drop to their knees. Then every screen in the command tent flickered back to life, replaying the drone footage from Kandahar, but in reverse. The object no longer approached. It retreated, folding into the clouds like smoke rewound through time. Ortiz's voice came through the comms, faint but clear. It's not a machine, it's a mirror. Moments later, static engulfed the signal, and the lights exploded in a flash of blue. Havers saw his reflection in every shattered monitor, each version of him moving a split second behind. Ortiz never resurfaced. The next morning, the ground above the descent site was cracked open like fractured glass. A low hum emanated from the fissure, measured at 7.83 Hz, the same frequency as the Earth's own resonance. Havers stood on the edge, watching light flicker beneath the surface. He heard Ortiz's voice again, not through radio, but through the vibration in the ground. Speaking a language no one recognized, but every bone understood. Command ordered immediate extraction. Havers refused. The valley pulsed once more, harder, and the light surged upward. In that instant, the cameras captured a single frame. A silhouette rising, human in form but transparent, vibrating like heat in air. They called it an extraction, but it felt more like a purge. Within 12 hours of the Kandahar incident, the surviving operatives were airlifted to an undisclosed site in Eastern Europe. No uniforms, no insignia, no names. The aircraft's interior was stripped bare. No markings, no serial plates, just soundproof metal and the constant hum of unfiltered engines. Havers sat chained to a bench, his reflection in the bulkhead vibrating slightly out of sync. Kuri stared at nothing, eyes open but distant, as though half of her was still in that valley. The soldiers escorting them didn't speak. When the pilot's voice broke the silence, it wasn't orders. It was coordinates Havers recognized as the valleys. The extraction wasn't leaving. It was returning. The facility was buried beneath a disused NATO base outside Bucharest. No designation, no insignia. Its corridors smelled of ozone and bleach. A single elevator led 15 levels underground where the walls hummed faintly, like a living organism breathing behind metal. Havers and Kuri were separated upon arrival. Interrogators wore respirators, their eyes visible only as glints behind mirrored glass. Questions never varied. What did you see? Did it communicate? Did you feel anything move through you? Havers answered truthfully at first, then stopped when he realized his answers changed each time he spoke them. The memory wasn't stable. Neither was he. By the 5th session, the recordings began to misalign. Video footage showed Havers answering before the questions were asked. On playback, Dr. Kroll's reflection moved independently of her real self. The security team blamed corrupted feeds, but Havers recognized the pattern. It was the same distortion that began in the valley. He whispered to the glass, calling out to Ortiz, though she'd been declared missing in action. In the recording, her voice responded. It was faint but undeniable. The room's temperature dropped. Kroll's pen floated an inch from her hand before snapping against the table. They ended the session. Later, when they checked the audio, the entire tape was blank, except for one line. "We are what listens back." They sedated him, hoping to erase the event through deep hypnologic regression, a protocol used only on high-level witnesses of unacknowledged incidents. But in his induced dream, Havers didn't relive the valley. He relived the moment before it. The drone feed, the object, Ortiz's voice, all reversed. The valley's light converged instead of expanding, folding inward until the horizon vanished. When he woke, every monitor in the lab displayed the same coordinates repeated endlessly. Kuri was missing. Her bed showed no sign of struggle, only a faint imprint, as if her body had sunk into the fabric and evaporated. At 300 hours, the base lost all external communication. Surveillance feeds looped 15 seconds of empty corridors, endlessly repeating. When the emergency lights activated, every cell door stood open. Havers walked through the corridors alone, hearing voices through the intercom, fragments of Ortiz, Kuri, and himself overlapping. The facility walls pulsed faintly as if alive, resonating with the same hum from the valley. In the control room, the main monitor displayed one new message in military font. Phase 2. Mirror activation. Behind him, footsteps echoed in perfect synchronization with his own. But he wasn't moving. The first alarm didn't sound like a siren. It was a human voice, synthetic and calm, repeating coordinates from the Kandahar Valley in perfect rhythm. The sound echoed through the underground facility as emergency lights bathed the corridors in red. Havers found himself staring at the surveillance feeds, each one showing different versions of the same hallway, some empty, some filled with moving silhouettes that looked like his own team. Dr. Kroll ordered lockdown, but every blast door opened instead. The walls trembled as if the building inhaled. In that instant, all power died, and a blinding light pulsed from the mirrored observation glass. The containment chamber wasn't holding anything inside. It was holding us in. They followed the light to level 15, the mirror chamber. It was supposed to be a containment space for the orb's fragments, but the panels were no longer reflective. They were translucent, pulsing like membranes between worlds. Havers saw Ortiz on the other side, standing motionless, eyes open and unfocused. He called to her, but she didn't react. Instead, his reflection moved toward him, mimicking his every word with perfect timing, except for one. The reflection smiled first. The panels rippled outward as if exhaling, and the temperature dropped to sub-zero. Kroll whispered that they were standing inside a neural field. The object had imprinted itself across dimensions, using them as conduits. The facility's sensors registered multiple identical life signatures. The surveillance team, what remained of them, reported duplicates moving independently through restricted zones. When confronted, they didn't resist. They simply stared and whispered coordinates in reverse. One guard fired a warning shot. Both his target and reflection bled simultaneously. The anomaly had erased the difference between image and origin. Havers and Kroll sealed themselves inside the command hub, watching feeds collapse into static snow. Through the flicker, Ortiz appeared again, whispering from every screen at once, "You're already inside the reflection." Then the power surged, and all cameras turned to face them. At 417 hours, seismic sensors recorded impossible data. The facility's structure folding inward by 3 degrees of spatial rotation. Doors led to themselves. Corridors ended where they began. Soldiers vanished mid-stride, replaced by faint heat. Shadows burned into the walls. Kroll theorized the mirror field wasn't expanding. It was reversing causality, rewriting events before they happened. Havers realized the only exit left was through the source. As the containment chamber began to vibrate, a low harmonic sound filled the base, like every memory ever recorded playing backward. They approached the core. The air rippled. Their reflections no longer followed. They reached the core chamber just as the mirrors synchronized. Every panel emitted the same pattern, a pulse aligned with their heartbeats. The orb, now fully reconstructed, hovered in the center, spinning slowly, surface rippling like liquid mercury. Ortiz's voice filled the air, layered over itself 1,000 times. "This is where you were born." The mirrors around them reflected infinite versions of Havers and Kroll, each one moving at different speeds. Some frozen, some screaming silently. The orb flared white, casting no shadow. In the reflection, Havers saw himself reach toward it. In reality, he hadn't moved. Then light consumed everything, and the feed cut to black. When Havers woke, the mirrors were gone. But their light wasn't. The facility lay in ruins, its ceilings folded like paper, yet the air shimmered with residual reflections. Kroll knelt beside him, pupils dilated to silver, her voice fractured into echoes that didn't belong to her. Above them, the world had changed. Drone feeds showed entire landscapes bending at impossible angles, cities flickering between night and day in the same frame. Command channels no longer existed. The only transmissions were overlapping broadcasts of their own words from hours ago. The mirror field had spread, replicating the moment of activation across the globe. The war had already begun. One fought between versions of the same reality. Across surviving channels, an emergency message repeated from an abandoned satellite uplink. Haver's own voice reading coordinates to nowhere. The Pentagon was silent. NATO dissolved into static. What remained of civilization mirrored itself in delayed signals, cities burning on one feed, standing pristine on another. Havers realized each broadcast wasn't a warning. It was memory replay. The world wasn't ending. It was rewinding, looping back toward its point of origin. Kroll theorized the orb's activation rewrote causality, turning every reflective surface into a transmitter. Humanity itself had become the antenna. Outside, the horizon fractured. Every reflective surface, from lakes to glass towers, became a portal between realities, projecting mirrored landscapes that shimmered with inverted light. Fighter jets were scrambled to contain what they could not comprehend. They vanished mid-flight, reappearing seconds later, inverted, flying upside down against their own contrails. Havers and Kroll emerged from the underground wreckage to witness the sky folding upon itself, constellations rearranging into geometries unseen by human eyes. Ortiz's voice whispered through the wind. "The mirror doesn't copy. It corrects." The surviving military factions called it the convergence. Across continents, mirrored duplicates of soldiers appeared, perfectly synchronized at first, then deviating with intent. Some fought beside their originals. Others fired without hesitation. Havers saw footage of an entire regiment disappearing into their own reflections on a waterlogged plain. The mirrors weren't openings. They were replacements. As governments fell, the entity began constructing symmetry across the planet. Kroll believed it was rewriting evolution itself, removing error, turning chaos into reflection. Humanity wasn't being destroyed. Humanity wasn't being destroyed. It was being corrected. By the 10th day, the war was no longer fought with weapons, but with identity. Every survivor carried two shadows. One slightly delayed, one slightly ahead. Kroll theorized reality had become self-aware, pruning divergences like diseased branches. Havers stood before a mirror made of solidified light, seeing infinite versions of himself, each bearing scars from battles he hadn't yet fought. Ortiz's final broadcast echoed from the sky itself. The war ends when you stop resisting reflection. Havers reached toward the glass. This time, his reflection didn't mimic. It reached first. The last surviving network node transmitted from a bunker under the Swiss Alps. Its automated distress signal looped endlessly, but no one was left to answer. Havers and Kroll traced the source, believing the original drone telemetry that started it all might still exist there, uncorrupted, a potential reset key. As they moved through the remains of Europe, the world shimmered in fractured symmetry. Cities glowing upside down in the sky. Oceans folding into themselves like metallic fabric. Time felt thinner now. Days and nights overlapped. Kroll whispered that if they could destroy the root signal, they might collapse the reflection entirely. Havers didn't answer. He wasn't sure which world they were saving anymore. The vault door bore no markings. Just a circle of glass glowing faintly from within. Inside, rows of obsolete servers hummed with life. The data that birthed the mirror phenomenon still ran, looping through corrupted drone footage, each frame bleeding into the next. Kroll approached the terminal, fingers trembling. She found the file. Spectre Hona 9 Kandahar. It pulsed faintly, heartbeat steady. Delete it, she said. Havers hesitated. The feed flickered, showing Ortiz's face again, whispering silently. Then another version of him appeared beside her in the screen, smiling faintly. Kroll pressed the key. The world shook. When the data core collapsed, the world convulsed. Streets rippled like water. The horizon bent into itself. Every reflective surface began to liquefy, draining upward into unseen dimensions. Kroll screamed as her hands dissolved into fractal light, her voice echoing forward and backward at once. Havers grabbed her, but she was already facing between reflections. She smiled through the distortion, whispering that she could see every version of reality, coexisting like threads in light. He begged her to hold on. "We're not dying," she said. "We're synchronizing." Then she vanished, her outline folding into a single beam of pure silver. Above ground, the world ended quietly. The oceans reflected the sky until neither could be told apart. Mountains mirrored themselves upward into infinite spires. Havers stood alone on a ridge where gravity no longer held meaning. The air was still, yet filled with faint whispers. The voices of every person who ever existed, overlapping, harmonizing into one endless tone. He looked at the sky and saw Ortiz there, walking upside down across its mirrored surface, smiling faintly. She lifted a hand, inviting him forward. Behind him, the earth began to fold upward, a single horizon closing into a perfect circle of light. Havers stepped forward, and the world folded seamlessly around him. There was no pain, no sound, just the sense of boundaries dissolving. His reflection met him halfway. For the first time, they were perfectly in sync. The orb reappeared above the horizon, spinning silently, its surface reflecting not images but possibilities. Humanity hadn't perished. It had ascended into its own reflection, unified and infinite. In that endless mirrored calm, Havers' voice returned, transmitted through every surface that still remained. Mission complete. The signal carried no sorrow, no triumph. Only balance. Then, with one final pulse, the mirrors turned to light. There was no sunrise anymore. Only light, even endless, without direction or shadow. The earth had stopped spinning. but the horizon still shimmered as if breathing. In the absence of time, fragments of the old world drifted through the new. A child's toy fossilized in glass, a soldier's helmet suspended midair, a single bird frozen mid-flight, its wings woven into light. The mirror had stabilized, neither alive nor dead, but aware. Somewhere within the calm, a faint echo of a man's heartbeat persisted. Not flesh, not memory, just rhythm, pulsing across the stillness, the last remnant of what once defined humanity. Motion against silence. Across the reformed plains, the echoes of consciousness hummed like low wind. What had been voices were now frequencies, each carrying fragments of thought, love, fear, and regret. Together they formed a living tapestry, replaying the last century of human existence in silent waves of color. Kroll's tone shimmered faintly among them, calm and measured. We succeeded, not in preservation, but in continuity. Havers walked among the waves, each step leaving ripples of light that replayed his past, brief flashes of the valley. The drone feed, Ortiz's final smile. Every memory reflected perfectly, endlessly. The mirrors had become archives, each surface storing the resonance of existence. When Havers touched one, the world rippled with forgotten detail. Forests reborn in flashes, oceans returning for an instant before dissolving. He realized every version of humanity still existed, layered atop one another, unified by reflection. This wasn't resurrection. It was equilibrium. He knelt before the light and whispered her name. Ortiz! And the mirror responded with warmth. For the first time, he smiled. In the reflection, she stood beside him once more, eyes bright, hand extended. But when he reached, she did not vanish. She waited. The heartbeat slowed, merging with the hum of the afterlight. Havers understood now. The mirror wasn't a weapon or a punishment. It was evolution through symmetry. Humanity's final act had been to become whole, stripped of separation. As he stepped into the reflection, his body dissolved into radiant threads, intertwining with the light until his consciousness expanded beyond form. Every thought became shared, every voice united. He could feel Kroll and Ortiz, and countless others, all merged in a single, boundless field of awareness. It was peace, it was terror, it was everything. There is no record of what followed, only illumination. In the vacuum where time once existed, a single point of light hovers, reflecting everything that ever was. The frequency continues to hum, soft, balanced, eternal. Some say the earth still spins, invisible within a sphere of perfect reflection. Others believe humanity became the echo itself, an infinite chorus singing in harmony with its mirrored self. The signal that began in 2009 never stopped. It simply became the world. And in that light, where silence holds its breath, a single voice endures. Neither man nor machine, only memory. Mission complete.